Hey everybody, welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. This is our Codefresh live event. I'm going to share my screen here. Now, feel free to make comments or questions during the presentation here. You should all now be able to see my screen. Looks like that's working okay. So this is, I think this is actually probably one of the first Codefresh live events we've done. I'm joined, my name is Dan Garfield, I'm VP of Marketing here at Codefresh, and I'm joined by our illustrious and wonderful CEO, Raziel Tabib. Say hi, Raziel.
Hi, everyone.
We have been hard at work on a lot of new features and new ways of working with Codefresh, new ways of deploying software, all designed around making life easier for our users. And we're really excited to share a lot of the stuff that we've been working on. Now, everything that we do today, we will be putting into a blog post, and so you will be able to reference it afterwards, and we'll have links to all the documentation, and you'll be able to download this presentation as well. So, anything else we need to cover before we jump in?
One more thing. After the session will be over, we will be sending a survey to you because we would really like to know how much you like each one of these features, how much you wanted these features to be in the product. Also, in the same way, we would like to hear from you what else you would like us to add to our backlogs and prioritize higher. So, just wait till the end of the sessions and please, fill out this survey and ask lists. This is pretty important for us to know and to listen to your needs.
Yeah, great. Well, so in today's agenda, we're going to be going through changes to pipelines, updates to image management, and then how we're working with Kubernetes. And then no product presentation would be complete without one more thing at the end. So we'll get to that part as well. So let's jump over to the pipelines. Now, if you've used Codefresh before, you know that we have pretty powerful capabilities within pipelines, and the ability to do really effective automation is in there. But we've been talking to users, and we found that there were a number of features that they were looking for, and we went ahead and redesigned our pipeline around that. So we now have a new user interface, and we have some great abilities to edit your YAML inside of the pipeline. So I'm actually going to jump over and show what that looks like. If I open up, opinions really. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I meant to switch to a different account here before we got started. All right. So if I jump over and look at a pipeline here, you can see that the whole user interface has been redesigned. The workflow you can view as sort of a default get up and running sort of guided experience where you have a place to take care of builds and unit tests and all those kinds of steps. But we've also added the ability to take what you've configured here. So you can see I actually have some build information here. You can take all that and you can actually switch to the YAML view inside the app. And when you do that, it actually pulls over everything you configured. You can make changes right here and save and build. This has been a highly requested feature since people working with YAML files would have to make a change, submit it to their repository, have the build trigger, see what the results were. Well, now you can make all the edits, save and build right inside of Codefresh. And then when you're ready, you can take this, you can copy it to your clipboard, save it to your repository, and put it under version control. Now, another feature that was highly requested was I want to create a pipeline that works among several different services. And so you can actually, once you have it in your repo, you can actually use a YAML file that's shared among several repositories. So that's going to make life a lot easier for a lot of people. And of course, this editing experience, we added a full screen mode. You can view the full thing. And so we're pretty excited about this, and we think that this is going to make life a lot easier for people working with Codefresh pipelines. Before we move on, Raziel, anything you'd like to add?
No, I think that this is definitely one of the enhancement requests that was for a long time being asked. Almost one of the things that we see across of all of you guys, all of our users, is that you start with the basic pipeline, adding basic steps like building, unit testing, pushing to a Docker registries, and then you quickly want to move into the YAML file, which you can add more and more steps, have a very robust and flexible pipeline. And the process of crafting and creating the YAML file was a little bit painful when you need to commit your changes to the Git repository for each change, and sometimes you might have some parsing errors and so on. The inline YAML file allows you to really get your head around the pipeline, test it, make some changes and test, and only once you're ready, you can copy it and put it in your YAML file. So this is like purely an enhancement request that intend to improve the user experience of building pipelines within Codefresh.
Yeah, great. Now, one other improvement here is about sharing environmental variables between steps. This is something you're going to see more clearly when we get to the image management section, so maybe we can save it until we get to there. We also added webhooks into the pipeline. So if I go back to my pipeline over here and I look under my settings, I can see if I turn the webhook on, I now have a webhook here that I can grab. I can throw this into my terminal, execute that, and you're going to see that the build has actually kicked off. There are a lot of really cool use cases for this. This was a highly requested feature for people that maybe had different automation tools that they wanted to integrate Codefresh into. So that was one use case, but Raziel, you brought up beforehand that there was another use case that you're seeing.
Yeah, so basically if you go back to the pipeline and you can grab this webhook, as Dan just mentioned, this webhook can be called from any command line, can be called also from other tools, whether you want to trigger a pipeline from Jenkins. But in the same way, you can basically chain pipelines. So you can call from one pipeline to the other using this webhook. At the last steps of the pipeline, you can run a Docker image with a command line and then trigger the other pipeline. You can also do that only based on previous steps results and so on. We'll get to that when we will talk a little bit in more details about the environment variables that can be passed from one step to the other.
Yeah, great. So webhook is super useful feature. Another feature that we've added is the ability to spin up environments on pull requests. Basically what happens here is when somebody makes a pull request, it can trigger your pipeline and it can actually spin up an environment. So a scenario might be you get a pull request, it triggers the build inside of Codefresh, runs the tests and all those things, and then it spins up a composition with that environment, and maybe creates a Jira ticket and posts that URL on there and says, hey, you can come check this out. And Raziel, I think you mentioned that you can also actually name the environments, right?
Yeah. So there is a step that we've worked with some of you already on implementing it, but there is a step, launch composition, that basically allows you to not only spin up an environment as part of the pipeline to run integration tests and then shut down the environment. It's actually going to spin up an environment and keep it up. This can be used in various use cases. One of the use cases, as Dan mentioned, is some of our customers that we're working with actually would like for every pull request not only to go through a code review process, but also once the test passed to keep up the environment. Also, they can decide the naming convention for these environments to include the author of the pull request or the SHA of the commit to make it easier for someone who wants to go and see these changes up and running to identify the environment. You can also send a link to this environment and set it in a Jira ticket and so on. So this is something that is really helpful and can help the rest of the team collaborate on code changes and review pull requests before you push your and promote your changes into staging.
Great. And again, as we go through, feel free to push questions into the presentation here, and we'll capture those at the end. Now, the other area that we did a lot of improvement in is image management. And what we really want to do with Codefresh, the goal isn't necessarily to replace all of your different tools you use in pipelines. It's really to connect all those elements into a place that you can manage and view them. And so, I mean, without further ado, image annotations are now available inside of Codefresh. And this gives you the ability to not only give, report on unit test coverage, but you can actually also integrate other tools. So here you can see an example where we've got a Jira ticket attached into an image report, and then we also have a performance report. So to show you how this works, let me jump over to Raziel's account here and show you the pipeline that he actually set up to do this. Well, actually, let's look at the images first. So if I'm looking at an images view, and maybe I want to drill down on this one, I can see this one has passed a quality check. If I open that, this actually has the BlazeMeter performance report associated with it, has the Jira ticket. I can see who committed it. I can see the size. I can jump directly to the GitHub commit. Basically, all the information is here in addition to the logs and the layers that have always been kind of part of Codefresh. But these elements are set by steps in the pipeline. So if we jump back over and look at that pipeline, and you can see here that this is one that Raziel created, and it is using that inline YAML. If we expand that out, we can actually see everything that's happening here. And so here you can see we have a running performance test step. And what it does is, first, it spins up a composition of this service. So it actually launches a one-off environment for this service to run in. And then it pulls in another container that basically has all the tooling needed to connect BlazeMeter over to this element, over to this environment. And then it runs the test. And when it does that, we get this. When that test is complete, basically you can set on, no matter what happens, we want to get the test results associated. And if it's successful, we want to set the quality check to be true and link to the performance report that we got. And if it didn't pass muster, we want to basically get rid of it.
Yeah, basically, if I can elaborate, and I look, this is basically the image that I pulled here to run Taros, which is an open source project by BlazeMeter, but it can basically run any other test type. In this specific case, I run JMeter, but you can run also Selenium and other type of test. As Dan pointed out, what in these steps, we also taken advantage of setting up environment variables that can be used later in that step. So within that step, I'm setting the environment variable of what is the link to the performance report. In the unit test results, we're actually setting up the environment of what's the coverage. And then we can see that at the last step of this pipeline, we're actually setting up all of this metadata on this image, including the Jira URL, the performance link, the performance latency, the unit coverage, and unit. The value of this environment is being set in previous steps while we were running the test itself. And what's really powerful is that as we get into that image and we see all of this information on this image, this can give us the right level of confidence about we can take that image now and promote it to staging or promote it to production because we have all of this metadata associated with that image. What is also important to mention is that this is not a metadata that's being kept within that image. Your image is still clean and include only the binaries and everything that needs to run in production. This metadata is being associated with this Docker image. So whenever you're looking at that Docker image, before you promote it, you get this 360 view on this Docker image to know if it's qualified enough to be promoted, if it's not qualified enough, and you need to make some additional changes before promoting this image to staging.
Yeah, another great use case for this is if you're on the DevOps team, you want the developers who are making changes to be able to self-serve the information that they need to make changes. And so by exposing this interface, you could see a scenario where they look at the performance report, or maybe they get the security results, and it doesn't pass muster, so it doesn't go over to the DevOps team. It sits with that developer, and it gives them all the information that they need to go ahead and make the changes. So that makes life easier both for the product development side, but also for the deployment DevOps team who's actually getting those changes into production. So great feature here, and as Raziel mentioned, it's the ability to pass those variables between steps that makes a lot of that possible. Great. So moving forward, another thing that we added is multi-tag support. So you can see, for example, that this image has a master tag and a production tag. So that's a useful feature because you can imagine the possibilities there. You could have tags for different people or different branches, and you could also see where they're at in the process, and so you could pull whatever the latest is. So moving forward into Kubernetes, and again, we are getting a couple questions, so feel free to add those in as we go, and we'll address those. The third area that I want to talk about today is Kubernetes. And Kubernetes is, of course, everybody knows that, we have support for ECS and Swarm and a number of other ways of deploying, but Kubernetes really is the most exciting orchestration tool out there, and it's the one that we've been investing a lot in and making a lot of changes to. Most of you probably have already connected a cluster to Codefresh, but if you haven't, you now can actually have full multi-provider support here. So here you can see a view of, I've got a Google Cloud cluster configured. I haven't added one for Azure or AWS yet here. And you can see custom providers. I've got IBM. I've got a cluster there. And you can see that I actually can see the status of those clusters. So I can see that this AWS KOps one that I set up is no longer responding. There's a good reason for that. It's because I took it down before this presentation. But you can see the usefulness of this, of being able to manage multiple clusters, connect any of the clusters you need, and swap them out. This is a feature that is not only requested for people that want to work with different Kubernetes providers, but it's also for people that want to experiment with deploying their environment into different clusters. They can see that it works in different clusters, or they might have different reasons to use multiple clusters. So this is a feature we're pretty excited about. And then another feature we've added is the ability to manipulate config maps from inside of Codefresh. So if you wanted to change a config map, you normally would have to go through and edit some YAMLs and do a kubectl apply and go through all those steps. And this makes it a lot easier to manage those config maps in a single place and get a view of what config map is associated with what namespace, with what cluster. And if you're not familiar with config maps, you can think of them a bit like environmental variables for Kubernetes namespaces. So here you can see an example where I've set a config map called production, and it has an API URL. So this way your container can basically show up on the cluster and then access the variable that's set in the config map to know which API it's supposed to use. So this makes life a lot easier for managing those config maps. Raziel, anything you want to add on that?
So yeah, with config maps, if you're working with Kubernetes, and many times, you just want to make some little tweaks to your environment to change some of the environment variables and so on. At the moment, without Codefresh, that will require you to go and create these YAML files and then go and manually go and update this and run this and deploy these YAML files to your cluster. This is going to make you, this feature will make you make these tweaks very easily and test your application under different values of this environment variable. So we find it very useful internally and when we're talking to our customers.
So now, before we go into the one more thing, I wanted to take a second to address questions that we had. It looks like we had a question about how the integration with Jira and Codefresh works. We actually do have a full blog post about that. It's basically just Google Codefresh Jira and you'll be the first result. Essentially, if you follow that process, what you can do is you can grab the image that we provide and then add it into your pipeline. And the only information you really need is, I believe it's just an API key. It's authentication information for Jira in order to actually start reporting tickets and information back into Jira. Raziel, did you have any other questions that we need to address before we move on?
No.
Okay, cool. So one more thing. All these features we're really excited about. There's something else that we're working on right now, and we're hoping to share a lot more detail coming up at CoopCon. We have been working with Helm internally for a while now, and it's getting to a point of maturity where we think that it's going to be ready to share soon. So if you're coming to CoopCon, come see us at booth S43. Helm charts, if you're not familiar with it, is essentially a lot like Docker Compose, right? Its ability to define your application, how it interacts, the steps that it takes during a release, those kinds of things. What would you add?
Yeah, so basically Helm, and more specifically Helm charts is a way to package applications in Kubernetes. It basically can help you package one service or multiple services within one chart. And once you have these charts defined, then it provides a very easy and intuitive way to set up a new instance of your application, update the instances of your application, and so on. So Codefresh, we're looking at Helm charts to be native entities within the platform, and basically provides you with an alternative way to run your integration tests. So whether you want to use Docker Compose format to spin up all of your services to run integration or UI or performance tests, you can do that at the moment. But even if you want to use and do the integration testing on Kubernetes and actually use charts to instantiate your application and shut down an application or get an on-demand environment on Kubernetes, you will be able to natively define, run, install, and update Helm charts from within the platform, from within the pipeline, and so on. So really stay tuned. We're looking to demo it in the KubeCon event and announce the support of Helm charts. We are all very excited, as I'm sure most of you have seen over the past year, that Kubernetes is becoming more and more popular as the underlying technology to run and orchestrate containers. And having ability to easily package an application, instantiate application on Kubernetes is becoming more and more necessity in order to run proper testing cycles on an application before we promote it into production.
Great. And one more thing, I'm going to be speaking at CoopCon with William Dennis, who's a product manager over at Google. We're talking about deploying to Kubernetes thousands of times per day. And we'll be sharing some of the things that we've been working on in partnership with Google Cloud and the Kubernetes team to make that whole thing a lot easier. So please come see it. I'll be there, and Raziel will be there, and William Dennis will be there. Great time. And then after this, oh, there it is. We will be publishing this event on our blog with links to all of the details, and we'll be sending out a survey, as Raziel mentioned, to ask you about the different features and kind of get your feedback on it. All of the things that we showed today are currently available inside of Codefresh, so feel free to jump into the platform and go play around with it. That'll give you a better idea of exactly how it all works. So with that, Raziel, any last words?
No, again, this is our first kind of web to share with you about new features. We usually send blogs and announcements, but we let us know also if this format is something that you would like us to keep on, giving you a live demos of these new features. As Dan mentioned, we are releasing it on a weekly basis. We will, sometimes on a daily basis, releasing new features, and we thought it might be useful every month or month and a half to connect again, with you, show with you, demo with you, and share what were the intentions and why we released these features. And hopefully this can be a great platform also for you to give us feedback on these features and give us some thumbs up or where you think you would like us to put more efforts in the product in the future. So looking forward to have more of these.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, guys. Have a great day, and as always, feel free to tweet us and check out our blog, and of course, go play around with Codefresh and build awesome applications. We look forward to seeing what you guys build. Have a great one. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.